Yeah, I try to share. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to share my desktop window with you. What can you see now?
Yeah, the
Can,
PowerPoint. But if you can do it like in a presentation mode.
oh, I get it. Yes. There we go. How is that, everybody? How does that look? Hello?
Eva, it's okay. Okay, go ahead. So don't worry about this. Okay.
Can you see it okay?
Yeah, yeah, it's clear. It's clear.
What is it, just small? All right, let's just start. So, storytelling can ignite imaginations. And imaginations is something that today in our country has been diminished. And stories can help energize the imagination of students. And personally, I think that's a really important thing that we need to try to do more in education. Storytelling can also enhance remembering the material. Isn't it very annoying when you teach something one week and then the next week they've forgotten it? And they've forgotten it because it's just a list. It's very easy to forget lists, and it's much easier to remember story and to remember, how the story made them feel. Storytelling addresses many learning styles. Not everybody learns through reading. Sometimes they're visual learners or auditory learners. And storytelling can really help with that, especially when there's repetition. Storytelling can build rapport among classmates and it boosts self esteem. Storytelling should be in everybody's toolbox. So, just quickly, what makes me a story expert is that I told you earlier that I was performing in schools with young children. And then I started growing into elementary school, junior high school, got into high school storytelling, and then college and university level storytelling. And the stories kept, and then eventually I became, and I still am, a speaker for adults and for large groups. And stories is what makes me a speaker people want to hear. I don't I don't do anything but tell stories because stories helps people connect on a very human level. So storytelling, you could teach any subject through storytelling, any subject. And if you want to put in the chat a subject that you teach other than English, I will be sure to address it. So you can use picture books for the young students. You can use a newspaper article that has a story in it. You can tell a familiar story. And today I'm going to use Cinderella. Or you can use a personal story. Now, I know you're saying to yourself, what? A personal story? Yes. Students want, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Students want to get to know you. They want to they want to know who their teacher is beyond just being a teacher. By sharing a personal story with your students. And I mean not invading personal boundaries, okay? But sharing a story about something you did that was meaningful, something that you love. For example, maybe you went on a hike and you saw something spectacular and it made you think of your grandmother who passed on. But a personal story that makes your students feel something about you, connect with you. In other words, when you share a personal story, what you're doing subconsciously is you're saying to your students, I trust you with my story. You can trust me with yours. And then if students are having a tough time with something, they may feel more comfortable speaking to you. And if you could save a life because you've become that person that a student can open up to, then congratulations to you. I don't know about in your country, but in our country, there's a lot of suicide, especially after COVID. Students are having a hard time and they need their teachers to be somebody they can talk to outside of people at home. And sharing a personal story can do that. Okay, enough of my little spiel about personal stories, but you're probably going to hear more about them. Okay, back to sharing my screen a little bit. And by the way, all these slides I'm happy to share with you. And I do have a handout. Faisal, can people right now download the handout so that they can begin to see what I'm talking about so they don't have to take too many notes?
Actually, I when I send the invitation, I attach the handout. But I don't know.
Okay.
I'll try if I can attach it
Okay,
here.
so while you try, just so you know, a handout is in your emails.
Yeah, yeah, okay,
And
download it.
it reviews some of the basic stuff in this presentation. So what is the POW in a powerful story? The answer is emotion. That's right. So here are some universal emotions that hopefully you can emphasize in your stories. And if an emotion isn't present in your story, as the storyteller, as the teacher, as the narrator to the class, I'm hoping that you can find an emotion that your students need to learn about and add it to the story. And I'm going to show you examples of how you can do that. But emotions make the story memorable. I like to say that messages without emotion go nowhere. They're spoken, it's like a volcano, okay? It erupts, you give your message, and then it dissipates like ash, gone forever from their minds. And what your stories hopefully ignite are like a volcano, but they ignite ideas and emotions, and these emotions stay with them, become a memorable vision. So we're going to start with techniques for reading a story. Now, this is easier because you've got a book. You've got a book right in front of you. So let's say you are reading a story together. My suggestion in this technique is that you create the illustration with your students. In other words, and first you want to choose a lesson, a goal, or a value. You want to choose something that you want those students to remember about your story. The technique is to read the sentence and then repeat it in your own words. You want to enhance the story with dialogue and actions. We're going to go through each one of these. You want to involve the students in role play. You want to clearly gesture who's going to play the part, and you want to always tell the story to the group. You never want to tell the story or speak to the student that you've chosen to play the part. Okay, I promise you I'm going to break that down, okay? I promise you. We don't remember facts and figures. You can go on about language, about vocabulary words, but it's so hard to remember. However, if you use those vocabulary words in a story, it is so much easier to remember. Okay. Maybe I should go back. Okay, I'm gonna escape right now so that I can quickly show you an example of reading a story from a book. Okay, so here's a children's book. I just chose this little book here. Okay, here's the picture. Sorry, here's the picture. Okay, there's a picture of a man sleeping. Let me read this to you. When it was hot in the palace, King Solomon was in the habit of taking his afternoon nap under the shade of a broadleaf fig tree in the garden. King Solomon, I'm pointing to a student in my class. King Solomon yawned. Yes, he yawned. And then he raised his arms and he stretched. And King Solomon said, I'm so tired. I'm going to take a nap under this tree. Now, if your student says, what are you doing? You repeat the story to the class, not to the student. King Solomon, he yawned, he stretched, and he said, I'm so tired. I'm going to take a nap. And now you're giving verbs, action words. You are giving dialogue to this character. And now everybody in the classroom sees this one student sleeping on the floor. I mean, it's funny. Everybody in the class is going to laugh. And you can repeat it in English or in any language you're teaching. If you're teaching science, you could teach anything about oxygen, needing more oxygen when you yawn. You could teach about the value of rest. I mean, okay, I'm going to show you one more example and then we're going to move on. One day, while the king was sleeping under the tree, a young bee flew into the garden. It flew from one pretty flower to another, drinking the nectar. When it had had enough, the bee decided to rest and landed on, of all things, the king's nose. So now I'm going to put it in my own words for the class. So while the king was sleeping and snoring, the king was snoring. Now, I could choose a different king. If this king isn't paying attention, I'm going to choose this kid and say the king was snoring. Kids love to snore. There was this little bee buzzing. Okay, I'm pointing to another student right now. The bee. Now, it's better not to point with your finger. It's better to point with an open hand. It's kinder. It's nicer. The bee was, okay, atef. Atef, if you want, you can unmute yourself, please, because I'm pointing right to you, Atef. And the bee was buzzing. Atef, I don't even know if you unmuted. Faisal, I'm using you. I'm pointing to you, Faisal. The bee was buzzing. Does everybody get this? Do you understand? I'm asking Faisal to buzz like a bee. The bee was buzzing, and the bee was hopping. Another good action word. The bee was hopping from one flower to another until the bee landed right on the king's nose. Now, you wouldn't want the bee, touching another student, but you can just move on very quickly from that. The king jumped up, felt something on his nose. He rubbed his nose and he realized that the bee stung his nose. Okay, so there you go. That's how you actually read a story. Are there any questions about that in the chat? Faisal, if you see anything, please let me know so I can interrupt myself and answer your questions. Okay, now we're going to go into techniques for telling a familiar story, like
Eva,
Cinderella.
sorry, Eva.
Yes.
Actually, those who ask about the handout, actually, the option for attaching here is not available.
Okay.
So I don't know. I cannot find it. So I told them will send it later by emails. And do you want them to speak so I can allow the mics for them? Just tell me.
Sure. If anybody has a question about reading a story, yes, go ahead. Put it in the chat rather than everybody,
Yeah, exactly.
unmuting. Put your questions in the chat so I can answer them. And then we're going to go into techniques for telling a familiar story. And while the questions are coming in, I am going to share with you some of those techniques. And the first thing that you want to do when you tell a familiar story is outline the story in 4 scenes. And after that, you want to choose the message, the goal of your lesson. Have a clear goal for what you're teaching. Then you want to enhance the story with dialogue and action words, verbs. In other words, you want your students to interact with each other, to bring the story to life. And lastly, you want to involve the students in role playing. Okay, everybody's been so consumed with the handout. We are going to make sure you're all going to get it. You can email me or Faisal and get that handout. And okay, so since there are no questions, I am going right into techniques for telling a familiar story.
Eva, there is a question. I don't know. How can I not making my class feeling bored while reading a story?
Well, I believe if you try this technique, they won't be bored because you're involving them. So maybe it wasn't clear about the technique, and maybe we could do a whole workshop on this technique, but I want to keep going. But basically, involving students in role play makes learning fun. Anything else?
No. A question.
No. Okay. Okay, I'm going back to sharing my.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. There is
Last.
a question. This question: how to introduce or explain abstract ideas while narrating the story?
Explain what ideas?
How to introduce or explain abstract ideas while narrating the story?
Right. Abstract ideas. Well,
Mm.
give me an example of an abstract idea. I mean, if a science, do you want to teach science? You could talk about bees and how they pollinate on flowers. And you could do that in the story of what I just shared. If you wanted to, there are so many abstract ideas. You could talk about how bees, how honeybees die after the first sting, how there's so many ideas that you can share. Yes, so somebody said it's difficult to put words in your own words. I know it's a little difficult, but when you try it, you get better at it. Try it with your own children. Try it with your class. You might want to say, hey, let's try something new. And then ask your students to help you put it in their own words. I mean, work together on this. This doesn't have to be something where you need to be the all creative, the omnipotent creative person. Put it out there in your class and say, how can we use each other to bring this story to life? What could the bee be doing? What could the king be doing? And let your students think about it. I mean, it really engages imaginations and makes it a lot of fun. Yes, you can use it to teach mathematics. Absolutely. I mean, maybe not in this particular story, but you might say there were 10 flowers that the bee was pollinating. And when the bee pollinates, it multiplies pollination by 50. So how many flowers would that be? You know, yes, you can use it in mathematics. There are just, use stories to teach math. I really believe in that. Use stories to teach science. Okay. Sorry. Yes. And morals specifically. Yes, lots of morals. I'm looking at the chat. But I am going to move on. Let's move on so that I can get to everything else and then have you get on with your day. So I'm going to repeat. Telling a familiar story like Cinderella, we break it down into scenes. We choose the goal or the lesson we want students to know. We want to enhance it with dialogue and actions, and then involve students in role play. Okay, how do we do that? Yikes. That's a crazy amount of stuff. Okay. Here we go. The characters are highlighted in yellow. So first scene, Cinderella's a servant. She works hard. If you want to teach verbs, she mops, she cooks, she cleans, she works for the sisters and the stepmother. So right there, you have 4 characters that you can use. The second scene is the fairy godmother and maybe the chariot driver and the fairy godmother helpers. You know, you can add characters so that you can use more students in your classroom. And you, of course, have the prince and the people at the ball. So there are tons of characters. You can include every student in your classroom with something to say. Then there's the chase and the glass slipper. And then in the very end, there's your ending. And that's, of course, where you can teach a valuable lesson. Yes, you can end the story that they lived happily ever after, but you could also end the story with, is there really a Prince Charming? Can we be happy despite our circumstances? How do you move forward after being abused? I mean, you can get children or students to journal and have a private journal about it. You can have students have discussion groups. I mean, you can use the story to address. I mean, here, Cinderella is a fairy tale, and yet you can use this in a college setting to discuss the value of teaching important messages through story. Okay, so let's see. So your goal may be vocabulary words. Your goal may be teaching an important message. You want to have a message and a goal. The message might be healthy relationships, subservience, determination, bullying. And of course, to make the story powerful, you want to have some universal emotion of some kind, feeling fear, courage, compassion, hope. These are all emotions that if you can bring into the story, it will be more powerful. And then, of course, as I said before, I showed you how to add action words, add verbs. So the verbs might be, she laughed, she threw her arms up and said, she panted, she was so scared, she was shaking. Younger kids love to burp. They love to make noises like that. It makes everybody laugh. To add dialogue, when the story says she was sad, or when you say, Cinderella was so sad, she hung her head, she frowned, she dragged her feet, she moaned, she wept. So these are all ways to get the student who's playing Cinderella to bring Cinderella to life. And when the student moans, everybody's going to laugh. When she weeps, everybody is going to laugh. It just makes it fun. When the fairy godmother came, she was shocked. She jumped up in the air. Her mouth opened wide. She said, wow, are you here to help me? I have a fairy godmother. So you tell the story in a way that the student can speak it. And then when it got so late, it was almost midnight, she had to leave the ball. She was so frustrated because she didn't want to leave. And she yelled, ugh, I don't want to leave. And you're getting the student to repeat after you. So Cinderella said, I don't want to leave. I'm having so much fun. Now, depending on the age group of your students, you could say, draw a picture about a time when you didn't want to leave, but you had to leave. You had a curfew. Tell a story about a time when you had the most fun of your life. So you could actually stop the story and have the students think about a time when they went to a ball or the most fun they ever had. And maybe they're willing to share it with the class. That's even better. But if they don't want to share it, make sure they write it down in the journal. A time when I had the most fun in my life. They could write about a time when they were told what to do. They didn't want to do it, but they had to do it. So there are so many messages in this simple fairy tale that you could teach with adults, with high schoolers. And it brings this story to a whole new level, because now we're not just telling a story, we're thinking, we're connecting to our own lives. I'm sorry, I really should have been allowing you to see me. But these stories can help students connect to their own lives. Okay, if you've thought of any other ways you could use Cinderella to teach a message, please put it in the chat. And if you have a question, let me help you answer it. But Cinderella, I hope you go back into your classrooms next week and you use Cinderella. So I'm actually going to start from the top. Let's see, I'm only going to speak for like maybe another 10 minutes. So let's start at the top and see how you might tell the story. If I were you, I would say, Cinderella. She was born into a good family that had money. She had a home. But when her mother died, her father married another woman who made her, and then when the father died, her stepmother made her a servant in her home. Cinderella, now I'm pointing to a student. Cinderella got down on her knees and started scrubbing the floor. She said, "Oh, I hate my life." She kept scrubbing. And then she put her arms in the air and she said, "If only someone could help change my life." Her sister, okay, I'm pointing to another student. Her sister came into the room and said, made fun of her and said, "Oh, Cinderella, can you please brush my hair? Cinderella, can you dust over there? I see a spider web." And Cinderella would do whatever she said. So now you're actually giving one student power over another student. Imagine if the sister was played by a really shy kid and Cinderella was played by the popular kid who's always telling everybody what to do. Imagine when the shy, quiet kid says to the popular kid, "Cinderella, shine my shoes." Cinderella, can you imagine how it would change the way kids feel? It's interesting to think about. Now, let's say the shy kid obviously doesn't have the courage to say, "Cinderella, shine my shoes." But you're telling the story to the classroom. So you say, this, the wicked stepsister said to Cinderella, "Shine my shoes." That's 3 words. The kid might go, "Shine. No, I can't say it. I can't say it." And then you could say, "Come on, everybody in the class, help the sister say all together, shine my shoes." So in other words, you can get everybody to help the shy student come out of themselves. So one day, Cinderella was outside the house. She was pulling her hair out. So hopefully the student will do that, go like this. She was, okay, come on, put it in the chat. What else could she be doing? She was biting her nails. She was crying. She was weeping. I mean, there are all these things she could be doing when suddenly appeared a fairy godmother. Okay, now I'm pointing to another student. And the fairy godmother spun around. The fairy godmother whistled a tune. The fairy godmother, whatever the fairy godmother does. And then she said, so I gave her an action, and now I'm going to give her dialogue. The fairy said, the fairy godmother said, Cinderella, would you like to go to the ball tonight? Cinderella responded. She said, yes, I would. Now, if the student says, yeah, I want to, you can repeat it to the class. You say, Cinderella said at the top of her lungs, she screamed, yes, I would. And now the student might say it a little differently. Okay, so this is how you tell a familiar story. I think I've given a lot of examples, and I'm going to go back to, let's see, any other questions or thoughts about this? I know this is difficult and it doesn't like come naturally, but if you give yourself the chance to give it a try, I like to suggest that you can. I mean, not do all of it, but you could do some of it. You can actually do some of this. So create the illustrations, gesture clearly to the student who's going to play the part. Always tell the story to the audience, not to the actual character, and involve the rest of the class. I really didn't get into this, but actually let me share quickly. How can you involve the rest of the class? So, the fairy godmother said to one of her helpers, can you please take that dress out, that beautiful scarf, and give it to Cinderella? So the student will take the scarf out from the prop box, and then the helper said, okay, I'm giving the helper dialogue, Cinderella, you will look beautiful in this scarf. Let me help you put it on. And the student says that to Cinderella. Now, let's say that's too much for the student to say. Repeat it and break it into one sentence instead of two. The helper said, Cinderella, you will look beautiful in this scarf. Okay, I can involve, and suddenly it got windy. Everybody, it got windy. And even though it started to rain, pitter, patter, pitter, patter, pitter, patter, you can get everybody involved in sound effects. You could even say, and everybody was the sound effects. The chariot rumbled on to the ball, and when they got to the ball, there was lots of laughing. There was lots of cheering when people walked in their beautiful scarves and gowns. So you could see how you can involve lots of different people in the actual story, even though they may not be in the story. Okay, if there were babies crying, or there were monkeys. Oh, monkeys are really great. Ooh, ah, ah. Kids love to make monkey sounds or frog sounds, gribbet, gribbet. Any kind of, you might even say there were monkeys greeting them as they entered, depending on what you're teaching. If you're teaching science, or maybe you're teaching the sounds that animals make, or you're teaching whatever, you could throw it in the story. Isn't that amazing? You're using the shell of Cinderella to teach whatever it is you want to teach. Okay. So A great story is selecting the right story for your class, disclosing something personal, evoking an emotion, and then sharing some wisdom. Every story needs to share something to learn. Okay, what is the message? Let's all learn something. And then you become memorable. You make an impression. You will become the most wanted teacher in the school, because nobody remembers details about what you say. They don't remember lists. They don't remember facts. They remember how they feel. Okay, to add some fun factors, somebody mentioned this before, take photos or videos of your students doing this. And you can use those photos in newsletters, in social media, at your end of year celebration, in a school-wide program. I said before, enhance the stories with costumes and props like hats, vests, robes, scarves, cloths, easy things. And then lastly, after you've told your story, you could divide the class into small groups and then give them each one of those scenes and have each of them tell that scene in rhyme. Like she rubbed her chin, she scratched her head, she tapped the floor, she thought some more. You could come up with a rhyme. They could improvise. Improv, that's improvise. Or they could tell it in their own way. So there are so many ways to keep using that story to build on what you're teaching. So really, one story could almost last you a couple weeks of lessons. Follow-ups. So with that story, ask your students to write or draw a picture about a time they were bullied, a fancy occasion they attended, a time they felt unnoticed. If you have younger students, draw a picture about the scene in the story. Explain to us why that scene resonated with you. Why did you choose that scene? Is there another story there? Tell us. And of course, if you're teaching English language, you want to list new vocabulary words and ask them to use those vocabulary words in the journal writing. Story is a gift. It can change lives. It can change worlds. So now I'm going to stop sharing. I have come to the end of my presentation. I'm going to answer some questions, and then I'm going to end with a story that you can go home and tell your family and your students. It's a retellable tale. So I know that there are, do we want to turn mics on? I'm thinking it's easier to just put it in the chat so we don't get a lot of noise here.
Okay, Eva. Eva, I allow the mic, so they can raise their hands if anyone wants to ask. So you can see the hands raised, and we can choose them. Okay, guys, if you have questions, like for 5 minutes, and then
somebody asked,
raise your hand.
Pictures? Somebody asked, can we use pictures while telling a story? And my answer is, why? Why use a picture when the idea is to create the picture using your students? In other words, you see this picture in the book? You can see that there are 4 people in the picture, yet the story is only about one person. And that makes you think, yes, there are more people I can use to tell the story. Yes, I can do this. So create the picture with more people. Okay, anybody else?
Okay, I can select one question. I said that someone says or asks, in this generation, I'm not interested anymore in Cinderella stories. Yeah,
Ah,
I
well,
I caught this from chat box. Yeah.
yes, I
Yeah.
I appreciate your comment. I beg to differ.
Mm.
Fairy tales may seem very childish, but actually the messages in them are very powerful. And I will guarantee you that your students are dealing with a lot of the messages in that story. See, that's the trick. The trick is to find a story that you think your students will enjoy. And I think that Cinderella is familiar, so it's going to shock them to realize, wow, this story is actually pretty deep. In other words, every story is deep. And I'm suggesting that you can find what's deep in any story and make it come to life for your students. Thank you for the question.
Can you see the questions in the chat box, Ava?
Yes?
Yeah, there are two questions here down.
What topics are appropriate for adult learners? Every topic. So let's say you're adult, many of the adults in your class have children. Why wouldn't you use Cinderella? If your adults are more 20-year-old adults, I mean, what topics? Any topic. The idea is, what are they dealing with in their life? Maybe they're struggling to find work. Maybe they're dealing with finding someone to have a relationship with or to marry, or maybe they're living with their parents and they have to deal with their parents, or their parents are telling them how to live and they want to have the courage and the determination to live the way they want. I mean, you know your students. I don't know your students. Figure out what topics would be important for your students. And then, frankly, I think you could use Cinderella. You could use any story to teach that topic.
Okay. Thank you. How to deliver the difficult
Difficult
words
words to the
to the
students
students
while telling
wisely?
them the story. Okay, a difficult word, let's say, would be, I mean, that's, give me an example, Faisal, of a difficult word. Like, let's say,
Like,
improvise,
yeah. Okay. Sympathize.
sympathize. Okay, sympathize.
The verb.
So, Cinderella
Mm.
felt sympathy from the fairy godmother. She felt, now describe what sympathy is. Cinderella felt that the fairy godmother understood her. She felt that the fairy godmother cared about her. The fairy godmother did sympathize with Cinderella. She did care about her. And suddenly it was this feeling that made Cinderella feel she could trust the fairy godmother. Okay, so I really milked the word. In other words, I used it in different forms. I used it from Cinderella, from the fairy godmother. So there are ways. So I hope I answered your question.
سكر الشباب والله حبيبتي ما تصير هاي شيء
Okay.
Well, maybe if she tells her little child the story of Cinderella, her child will stop crying.
Mm.
Okay, Faisal, anything else? Let's see. Is it
Um.
possible to share real life stories in an adult classroom?
Okay.
That is better than children's stories. Yes. I think share real life stories. Share stories about what's going on in the news and how people might be feeling. Share stories about yourself. Yes. Share stories to create connections between the students in the classroom and you. Yeah, create connections. And then you build rapport. And then you build like a team. You build a classroom of people who care about each other. And that could last these students a lifetime. And yes, of course, you can use these skills to improve reading. Yes, of course. Now, if reading is your goal, you may want each student to read the line and then you put it in your own words. You share it and bring the story to life with the students, but you have the one student be the narrator and read it from the book. Okay, I am going to end today with a story that hopefully you will share with all of your family and friends and class and students. It is a retellable tale, and it's a story about an apple. Okay, and this apple lived in a forest of, I'm just very curious before I get off. Have I been in a little box this whole time and people see names on the screen? Faisal, is that what's been happening? Do you see me as a little box or do you see me big on the screen?
I can see a big box, like a big box.
Oh, okay, good. I'm glad to know that. Okay. So this story is about an apple tree. And this apple tree lived in a forest full of very big, tall oak trees. And every night the apple tree would look up. And in the darkness, the apple tree saw stars dangling on the branches of the oak tree. And the apple tree made a prayer and said, I want more than anything. The apple tree said, I want more than anything to have stars on my branches, just like those oak trees. Okay, so she said this in sign language. This is real sign language. She said, I want more than anything to have stars on my branches, just like those oak trees. Every night she made this prayer. And do you know what? What? Nothing happened. The seasons passed and this apple tree began to grow these beautiful blossoms, and birds would come to sit on the apple tree to whistle. They started to whistle. Okay, this is involving the whole classroom. They started to whistle, and yet it wasn't enough, because every night the apple tree would look up, and in the darkness, she saw stars dangling on the branches of the oak trees. It wasn't fair. She wanted stars on her branches, just like those oak trees. And she made her wish, her prayer in sign language. Everybody do sign language with me. And she said, I want more than anything to have stars on my branches, just like those oak trees. Every night these apple trees made a wish. Do you know what? What? Nothing happened. The seasons passed and the apple trees began to grow these big juicy apples of every color of the rainbow. What color are your apples? What color? And every day, people would come to sit under the apple tree to play, to picnic, to laugh. And yet it wasn't enough. Have you ever felt like it's not enough? Then you know how this apple tree felt. And every night she made her prayer in sign language. This time, let's do it in sign language only, which means we move our lips, we move our hands, but we don't make a sound. Everybody, do it with me. And the apple tree said, every night, the apple tree made this prayer in sign language. And on this night, her prayer was heard, and there was a gentle breeze through the trees. And as the breeze went through the trees, there was a voice. And the voice said, "Isn't it enough that you have big, juicy apples, that people sit under your tree to talk and play? Isn't that enough?" And the apple tree shook her limbs. "No, no, it isn't. It's not enough." And at that moment, there was a big wind, such a wind that the apples began to drop from the tree. And as the apples dropped from the tree, the apples broke in half. And the apple tree, hang on a second. And the apple tree looked inside and said, "Oh, I had stars in my branches all along. I just never knew it." And do you know that each and every one of you has a star within you, just like this apple? And if you don't know what you're a star at, all you have to do is change your direction. Instead of cutting your apple from the top to the bottom, cut it through the middle, and you too will rediscover the star that's within you. Thank you.
Please clap, clap, clap. Wow, amazing. Amazing.
Oh, was I? Okay, thank you. I was going to share. Should I share my last slide just so that everybody can connect with me in different ways? Hang on. There's so many buttons to push. But anyway, feel free to connect with me. I am open to you and available. Through my website, you can get some newsletters, maybe 3 times a year. Check out my blogs. I'm on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, and I love to share a story. My last name is spelled Gray, gray, like the color of my hair. Don't forget the Y, Zel. And I have published 2 children's books to promote dialogue and minimize fear around cancer. They are available on Amazon and my websites. And I've also published a story legacy to help people tell their personal stories for future generations. And I published that booklet because after recovering from a life-threatening illness, I recognized that it was my stories that were more valuable than material possessions. And I wanted to leave this world knowing my children knew my stories. And now I want to help other people tell their stories for future generations. We don't want to wait till our parents and grandparents are sick and dying to get their stories. Capture their stories now, today, while they are well. That's a really great message for me to leave you with. And thank you, everybody from all over the world. Please put on Facebook what you thought about my presentation. I would love to know where you're from and what you thought and how this technique can make a difference. And I've done many of these workshops for free, but if any of you have an organization, if you want to fly me to your country I could do several programs for students, for adults, for educators, for parents.
For teachers.
Check out my website here. In fact, in the chat, I'm going to put the link to my website where you can see the programs I give in education. And thank you, everybody. This was so much fun. I hope you learned a lot. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, guys. So on behalf of English Language Center, University of Technology Applied Sciences, would like to thank everyone. And on behalf of all, would like to say big thank you for Eva, for motivational, a masterpiece and survival of storytelling. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eva. I would like you to enjoy your coffee. Still, I think it's cold right now.
Yeah, how about we open up the mic? Let's hear from people who want to stay on.
Yeah, it's no, I allow the mic. So anyone, we can. Okay, big thanks for you. Well, thanks here in the chat box. So if anyone would like to say some, the mics are loud, please.
Hello.
Yes.
We can hear you.
Yes, Ayan. Thank you for your time, and I like the way you are telling the stories. So,
Thank you.
can you hear me, Eva?
Yes, thank you. Where are you from?
I'm originally from Somalia, but live in Minnesota. Where are you?
Florida.
Florida. Oh, okay.
I live in
From
the beautiful
Joplin.
state of Florida, and actually, the sun is rising right now. So maybe I will. Yes, I can show you all the sunrise.
Yeah, really, those days, like almost 2 months ago, I left the country. I'm right now in Egypt, so inshallah, I'm coming back.
Hello, Eva.
Yes, hello.
Hello, I am Zibo. I am from Tajikistan, Central Asia.
Wow.
And I like the way you tell story and your techniques, how you did it and how you tell the story. I also like telling stories in my teaching career. And before, when I was teaching in a high school, I liked to use folk tales in my lesson. And as out of class activity, like not in the class, because it was 45 students and 45 minutes, not enough. But after school, we gathered together with students, and I saw the students like telling stories, folk tales, which is very familiar to them in native language. And I was listening you, I remembered my experience, how we did it. I asked my students to retell it, like a role play, to play it, like how you did it now using your hands. And I made them to feel that character, to put their place in that character's role. And then my students went and share it with other class. So I made them like a leader, like they go to other classes, even to kindergarten.
That is
even to
brilliant.
kindergarten.
That is brilliant.
Yes, and I like the last thing that you told about personal story. I did a digital story last year, and we use digital stories on personal narrative writing. And my students wrote we taught them how to write personal narrative. And they wrote the story. I like the morning sun there. It's beautiful, your background.
It's not my background, it's real.
It's real, yes.
From my balcony.
It's beautiful.
In Florida. I live in Florida.
Great.
And I live on the east coast of Florida, so this is the Atlantic Ocean.
Wow.
Is it Tampa?
No, Tampa's on the west coast of Florida.
Okay.
And I'm on the east coast.
Okay,
So
good.
it's on the same side as Fort Lauderdale
Yeah.
and Savannah, Georgia, and New York City.
Uh-huh. And if we will invite you in our English network, will you share presentation in our network for Tajik English language teachers?
For sure, yes, of course.
I will write you an email. Thank
Very
you.
good. Very
I
good.
love your presentation. Beautiful.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Hi, dear young cousin. Hi, this is Pranjana from Pakistan.
Hi.
So, yeah, I have lately joined, but I'm very happy as I understand the topic storytelling and the way of expression, particularly that is amazing. And the thing is that I want presentation if there isn't like any sort of the link available on Twitter on any another websites as I can download and hear completely lecture.